The first time I heard of David Blood was when I worked in Whitehall back in 2004, when generation investment management was new, and that was when people, when they asked what's Al Gore doing, this was well before the film, it was always Blood and Gore, David Blood, Al Gore, very nice name, new, really interesting means of leveraging investment in low carbon and more sustainable alternatives. But it's not for me to talk about that. It's for David to talk about that, the experience of the period of time between 2003, 4 and now. And I'm really interested, and I'm going to listen intently to what David has to say. So I give you David Blood.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody. I have to say this was not particularly welcoming. That's my favorite joke, Nick, the blood and gore joke, and I was going to use it, and you've kind of taken it from me. So I have to say I'm really nervous this evening, and I'm nervous because actually Tim Flannery spoke at our client conference in March, and Tim did an amazing job, and I feel like I owe him a similar sort of performance, and yet Tim is experienced and good at this, and I don't know how I will do, so I'm going to give it my best, Tim, but I do thank you again for what you did for us in March. Also want to thank my business partner, Mark Mills, for coming. I understand he booked all of these seats. I don't know what he told you all about why you're here, but I thank you for coming. And I'd like to say thank you to my favorite Australian family, the Bissell family, for coming as well. And all of the times I've been to Australia, I'd like to say that it's been great to be coached on sort of Australianisms. And I recognize I have an American accent, and I've lived for nearly 20 years in the United Kingdom, and I've been traveling to Australia relatively frequently for the last 5 years. And I've been told very specifically, and Nick, this is one of the reasons why I'm a little annoyed at you, is that you should never tell the same joke to the same audience twice. So, who has seen me speak before? Good. Because my strategy has become, because I only have one joke, so my strategy has become to go to find different audiences to speak to, that way I can continue with my joke. So I'm going to tell you my joke to start in, but actually it's relevant to what I want to talk about this evening. This is, I know, a swear word, so I just like to ask for apologies in advance, but I was a partner at Goldman Sachs, and sorry. Anyway, when I started in 1985, the then senior partner of Goldman Sachs, a fellow by the name of John Weinberg, brought all of the new, this is another swear word, MBAs into the room, and said, I want to try to put your job in perspective. And he said, in 1940, just as the Second World War was beginning, and the United States recognized that they would probably participate, they realized they did not have a selective service. They did not have a draft at that time. So they had to find a way to think about that, and the challenge that they had was, well, how do we prioritize jobs? And who should we want to draft first, and who should we want to try to avoid drafting at all cost? And so they prioritized jobs within the American economy. And you can imagine the jobs that they felt were very important. Of course, doctors, teachers would be critical to the economy and important to draft as far down as possible. But then they also decided who would be the least important profession in society. And in 1940, in the United States of America, the least important profession was a florist. So if you were a male florist, you might as well sign up, because you were going to go first. The second least important profession in American society in 1940 were investment bankers. I dare say that if we were to do the draft today, florists would be in great shape. So I want to talk about capitalism, but I want to talk about sustainable capitalism. And I want to put out here right now that I and we at Generation Investment Management believe that capitalism is an efficient way to address some of the challenges, the sustainability challenges that I will talk about. But we fundamentally believe that the historical, or what has become fundamental, market fundamentalism is really not an effective way to run economies and to allocate capital. So we would like to introduce a different concept, and we've been talking over the last year or so, last couple of years, about a slightly different term, and we're calling it sustainable capitalism. Many people have similar sorts of terms, but what it really means is we would manage our allocation of capital with a long-term perspective, that we would try to be more responsible with how we think about our resources, and that we would grow economies with an objective of building long-term sustainable markets and businesses and societies. We would explicitly include environment, social aspects, as well as other broader governance and leadership issues in how we thought about and how we should think about allocating capital. It is explicitly not what we've seen in the last 10 or 20 years, where in fact we are focused on next quarter's earnings in many respects, where we have allocation or incentive structures that are clearly misaligned and unhelpful in many respects. So it's really a desire and a view to make capitalism more responsible, more long-term, and to explicitly include broader issues that we think over time are extremely relevant to businesses and economies and allocation of capital. Now, why should we care about this? Why is this important? Why should we want to see markets as a source of part of the solution, if you will, as opposed to just a different aspect of the challenge? And I think we would mention a couple of things. First, inherently, when you think about economies and businesses, there are three sort of aspects. There's capital itself, and we'll leave that aside. There's labor, and there's resources. And so how you deal with the natural resources and how you deal with people in labor and ideas and innovation is critical to the core foundation of how we operate in everything we do. So it's just fundamental. Sustainable capitalism and sustainability and capitalism are linked. Secondly, the challenges that we face are extraordinary, and they're linked. The challenges of climate change, the challenges of sustainable development, the challenges of water, which you know very well in this country, the challenges of migration, health, et cetera, they're all interlinked, and they're huge challenges. And whether we like it or not, there's not enough money in philanthropy or in government to address the challenges. And just to give you some sense of the numbers, there's approximately $1 trillion in philanthropic assets. There's approximately $10 trillion in sort of government spending, annual government spending. There's $100 trillion in financial assets. And so whether we like it or not, and I know my friend James is going to talk about this later on, we need to find a way to mobilize capital. We need to find a way to have capital be more responsible and part of this discourse, because it's really the only way we're going to be able to address these challenges, and they're huge challenges. And incidentally, it will lead to more wealth creation and better economies and societies if we're careful about it. And let me give you some examples about businesses who recognize this. And one thing I meant to say earlier, and I didn't, and I apologize, is our core belief is that you can actually make money and do the right thing. They're not mutually exclusive. You can and should make money by doing the right thing. And there are a continuum of ways to think about that. Historically, people have thought about, well, you should do the right thing because you can protect your brand, you can protect your reputation. And there's some truth to that, and that's relevant. And certainly British Petroleum right now clearly needs to be thinking about that. And there is some probability that British Petroleum will lose their license to operate for an indefinite period of time. It is a huge challenge for them. So brand is obviously, and reputation is critical. And there are a number of examples of businesses who've gone out of business because they've lost their license to operate or their business growth has been impaired. Secondly, of course, is managing costs. And if you can reduce pollution, if you can reduce waste, you can improve your profitability. But what has been most interesting to us are businesses that recognize these challenges, these sustainability challenges, as opportunities, in fact, and that use their products and their services and their ideas and their innovations to drive revenues, to drive profitability and competitive positioning. So let me just give you a couple of examples of businesses that think about the long-term health of their societies and how they operate, and also do well for their shareholders. One important example that we have talked about and invested in over the years is a company called Novo Nordisk. They manufacture insulin. And what they have learned to do, or their company sort of objective, is to eradicate diabetes. Now you might say, well, why would you, if you were trying to sell insulin, why would you want to eradicate diabetes? Is that inconsistent? And what they have long figured out is that if they can work towards eradicating diabetes, they will be able to attract the very best scientists who want to work towards a real goal. They have learned that if they are prepared to invest in government programs to educate people on obesity and healthy lifestyles, that they will get a greater market share within countries such as China or India, and they have significant market shares in those businesses. So they have brought sustainability to the core of what they do, and in doing so, they have created protections of their market position by doing the right thing. And they have over the last 5 years, as a specific stock idea, has been an extraordinary idea. Marks and Spencer in the UK, there was an article in the Financial Times at the weekend talking about a program that they initiated called Plan A. They, a couple of years ago, said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to identify 100 actions that we can take to make our company more sustainable and more thoughtful from an environment perspective. And they, in their most recent report, thought that they were going to report more or less a £40 million loss to this initiative. In fact, in this year, they're going to report a £50 million profit by doing the right thing. And there are plenty of examples of other companies. Patagonia, the clothing manufacturer, typically more winter clothing, which right now seems to be relevant as opposed to when I left the Northern Hemisphere just the other day. It seemed it was summer and now it's winter. But in any event, they will clearly tell you that by doing the right thing, they make more money. The point I'm trying to make is that the most thoughtful business leaders have understood and get that sustainability is an opportunity to drive profitability and do the right thing. So that's the context of greening capitalism and sustainable capitalism that we've been working on at Generation. We founded the firm about 7 years ago now with the idea of hopefully doing a great job for our clients, but also to be advocates for awareness of climate change. Vice President Gore, I think, has done a pretty good job at that. At the same time, talk about sustainable capitalism and hopefully in our own way help to mainstream capitalism or sustainable capitalism. In a recent survey by McKinsey, the global consulting firm, through an analysis of senior executives around the world, 75% of senior business executives said that they believed that sustainability would be relevant to the long-term value creation of their businesses. So that was the context. Unfortunately, about 30% would probably qualify as actually practicing sustainable capitalism or the recognition and utilization of sustainability in their business strategy. So we have a gulf of 30 to 70%, and maybe it's 25 to 75%, something along those lines. And what we're trying to do is, and hopefully with all of you and others in the months and years ahead, is to take that dispersion from 30 to 75 and help bring capitalism and help mainstream sustainable capitalism. And again, it's because we think it will ultimately result in better economies, better allocation of capital, and very importantly, a better society and a better environment. So that's sort of our example of what we want to do. So what needs to change? What needs to change over the course of the next 10 years or so? And we would like to see capitalism become more sustainable over the next 10 to 15 years, and there's really no magic to that, but I will give you some examples of what has changed in the last 10 or 15 years to give you a sense of what can happen, and then link it to a transition to a low-carbon economy. There are a couple of things that to put into context. First, when you talk about sustainable capitalism, it's really a question of tactics on the one hand, like better disclosure, and at the same time it's of values. It's an understanding that the traditional method or way of thinking about market fundamentalism is not necessarily correct, and that we need to rethink our core values as to what is important. We need to think about how we might measure what is important. We need to internalize externalities. That tends to be carbon, but it can be water, it can be other environmental services, it can be health of communities. It can be all sorts of more difficult to quantify issues, but are relevant to us as people and relevant to us as participants in markets. And so it's a complex problem. It has both values that needs to be addressed, and it also has tactics that need to be considered. If we could have 3 silver bullets, we would probably say we'd like to see sort of 3 actions. The first is we would like market participants, both companies as well as investors, to be much more long-term oriented. The notion of managing portfolios or managing businesses to next quarter's earnings or even the next year's earnings is fundamentally not a good business strategy. It's not good economics. It's not good allocation of capital. And it actually results in pretty uninteresting investment results as well. So we would like to see that change. Probably the most important way to address that is to change incentive structures to compensate business leaders on an annual basis on profitability, and only profitability is actually not wise if you're not including what really matters to businesses, including how you operate in your community, your environmental footprint, how your employees are feeling, the safety of your employees, etc. So we need to change the way we think about incentive structures, and incidentally, investors need to be compensated with a long-term perspective as opposed to how they've done in the last quarter. So internalizing externalities and changing compensation structures are going to be an important component of that, and as I said, the time frame is important as well. And lastly, we need to continue and consistently make the business case. Unfortunately, and particularly in the United States, as soon as you say the word sustainability, people begin to think that you're not serious. You're not talking about real business. You're talking about something else. You're talking about politics. And that there are many people may be in this room, who fundamentally do not believe that you can do the right thing and make money. And yet, the number of examples, and I could spend a long time going through company by company that seems to understand that actually is a more effective way to run a business. So we've got to continue to focus on the business case consistently, and make people recognize that this is about economics, this is about common sense, this is about best practice. It's not about ideology, it's not about politics, it's not about something that's not relevant. It is fundamental core to how businesses operate. Now, I made mention a little while ago of our goal to try to mainstream capitalism in the course of the next 10 to 15 years, and we chose 10 years, 15 years on purpose. We chose it for one reason is that it's actually a time frame that we can think about. It's also quite important to the transition to a low-carbon economy. There are clear milestones that we need to meet as societies around the world in terms of our transition to a low-carbon economy, and 2020 happens to be the first leg in that transition, and I'll come back to that in a second. But whether it's 10 years or 15 years, we're not certain. But what we are certain is that we need to move in that direction. But it's possible to do that. And let me just remind everybody that 10 years ago, or certainly 15 years ago, many of us had not heard of the internet. Many of us actually did not have mobile phones, and would never imagine that we would communicate, we would have tweets and other things as a way to operate. We would never imagine that if we wanted to understand who was the second Prime Minister of Australia, which was a big argument today with myself and Mr. Mills, that we would just figure out how to go do that on Google. But that's in fact what's happened in 10 to 15 years. It's fundamentally changed the way we communicate, the way we operate, the way we shop, the way we develop our opinions, the where we get our news, etc. And the same is true for the mobile phone. And in fact, the mobile phone has the possibility of even leapfrogging the internet in terms of what it can do, particularly in developing countries. So things can change dramatically in a short period of time, 10 years or 15 years. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what needs to happen over the next 10 to 15 years in our transition to a low-carbon economy. Every single thing you did today, probably, most of us, had to do with hydrocarbons, ranging from getting here to what we ate and how we took our showers to all the aspects of our lives. Maybe in some cases to what we're wearing, has something to do with hydrocarbons. That needs to fundamentally change. And even all of us who understand that we're in the process of transitioning to a low-carbon economy, I'm not even sure we can really recognize or envision the change that needs to happen. But indeed, that's what needs to happen, and it needs to happen in this time frame. And so the reason why we have focused as an organization on sustainable capitalism is that capitalism and the transition to a low-carbon economy is fundamentally linked. It's the capital that businesses and investors that can bring to bear to this transition that will make the difference. And that's really what we're talking about. And I know that's an area that James will transition into here in a second. There is a American humorist called Will Rogers, and he lived, I guess 75 years ago. Anyway, one of my favorite quotes of his is he said that even if you're on the right track, if you just stand there or sit there, you'll get run over. And the point is I think we can be on the right track with sustainable capitalism and the transition to a low-carbon economy, but we have an awful lot of work to do. And I hope that the conversation that we have this evening will be a first step to moving off the track. Thank you very much.